Hi everybody, we're going to be coming back to our stone now. So we've actually been, we're coming back to an image that has been etched, and we did our first etch on the stone, and now I'm gonna take you through the process of doing your second etch. I might do a little bit of printing afterwards, but I'm gonna try and break this up as easily as possible so that students can have an easier time following along. Okay, so I'm gonna start with, I guess, my stone, and I'm gonna have a press here because when I'm doing my second etch, I'm basically going to come to my stone, and we did the first etch. We have our drawing material on the stone, and now we need to remove that drawing material and replace it with fresh ink. Now, we're not going to be printing this right away, but the point of replacing the drawing material with the ink is that we're putting fresh, greasy material on the stone, and then we're going to do a second etch, and that greasy material will be released with the nitric acid and the gum arabic of the etch to then strengthen our original first etch. So basically, like, if I didn't do this step, this second etch, there's no guarantee that my stone would print consistently. That first etch is good, and it might be a pretty stable image, but you know, I really want to do that second etch to just add more grease content to reinforce those fatty acid deposits in the stone, and that just to restabilize that non-image area, that adsorbed gum layer. So we're really just adding to those two layers, the oleomanganate of lime layer and the adsorbed gum layer. So that when we're printing, we have a nice stable image, and it doesn't want to fill in, it doesn't want to get too light in other areas. But you know, we're at a stage where we need to see what we did in the first etch. Okay, now when I'm doing this, I want to think about my time frame. The first etch will probably, you know, that took us a little bit of while to go through the steps in the process. The second etch, you know, I could potentially go right into printing after I do my second etch. I want to let it wait for a couple of hours ideally, but you know, I could do that in the same day. With the first etch, we needed to let the stone rest at least 24 hours, so we wanted to let that sit overnight. But once we're done with the second etch, we can pretty much go right into printing if we want to. And so that means, okay, sorry about that. I had a little a phone call. Let's see, so where was I? We're going to replace the ink on this. So the first thing that I need to consider is, you know, the size of my stone. I'm probably not going to print this today, but you know, we're going to go through the first or the second etch anyway. So the size of the stone, when I'm inking up my stone, I need to consider what roller I'm going to be using. Now this is a stone, obviously, but we do have other types of rollers that work with synthetic plates. So metal plates, emerald green plates, there's a variety of different types of plates, ball ground plates. But I want to use, I'm just doing a black and white image, so a black ink on white paper. So I'm going to be using a black roller. Now this is a leather roller, and it's got a wooden core, and it's got some wool on the interior, and you can see what this looks like. Now each roller is in slightly different stages of repair and conditioning. So all of our leather rollers are in fairly good condition, but one of them needs to be reconditioned a little bit better. It is a smaller one that's like this, but you'll be able to tell the difference, and we'll talk about that in person. These leather rollers, they come with handles. So look around, try out different handles. There's handles at all of the stations. And so you want to find one that works well with the roller that you chose, so that it's nice and loose on this, okay? Choose a roller base to hold this on, and your roller should be covered with plastic wrap. And we're just gonna unravel this carefully, and most likely we'll be able to use this again, so keep it handy, don't just crumple it up and throw it out. But this is what we keep our rollers wrapped in to keep them from drying out. If I leave my roller left out, you know, overnight's not going to be the worst thing, but if somebody leaves their leather roller out over the weekend, or potentially even longer if we're going on a break or something, then, you know, that could really damage the roller. So we need to be very careful of it. And actually, when I came in today, there was a leather roller out without any type of wrap on it. Okay, so this roller hasn't been used in a while. I chose a small roller. Over there, I'm not sure if you can see those. Those are different types of synthetic rollers. We have a larger leather roller over here. There's another small one over there. And there's another large leather roller. And then we have some synthetic nap rollers as well, and rubber rollers. The rubber rollers and the synthetic ones, you know, we use mostly for color printing, and the leather ones we use for black and white. Obviously, if this is just for black and white imagery, I'm not going to be using colored inks. If I were to try to use a yellow ink and there's all this black caked on it, it's not going to look very, very bright and saturated. So I'm going to actually bring this over here. The first thing I need to do is just scrape off the old ink, and I'm going to use this cake frosting spatula, and I want to bend it at about this level. I want to look at it, make sure that all the old ink is off of this. Now there's dried ink on here, older ink from whoever was using it before, and I want to scrape it off because I don't really know what the consistency of that ink was. Plus it's probably, you know, it's not very good to use anyway. It's not, you can see from it, it's very old. So I'm gonna bend my spatula at an angle like this. I'm gonna take, I usually will keep this right in the base that it's in, and pull this right up against my hip so that it doesn't come off the base. And I'm just gonna scrape, rotate, scrape, and I'm using quite a bit of force here. You know, I want to get off that old stuff, and carefully, you know, look at the edges, make sure I get all of the edges. Now I'm gonna rotate the spatula. And then I'm just going to take some paper towels. I'll have a razor blade. This might help me get some of that old ink off. And I'm just going to keep rotating, going around. Now I can tell that the nap, the leather nap, that's, you know, what gives the ink something to cling to. It's kind of the texture of the leather that that makes it really kind of enjoyable to print with. The nap is starting to get lowered on this. This could be reconditioned at some point, but it's a bit of a process to do that. So I'll probably wait till the summer and recondition a couple of them at the same time. And we have a new roller that I'd like to, well, we have two new rollers that I'd like to condition and get prepared to use. So go all the way around, you know, check your edges. You know, they tend to hold on to ink a little bit more than some of the other sections. Looks like there's a little bit of a buildup on this roller along the ends. Okay, so that'll be good. Try and remove the excess. It kind of wants to stick to the spatula, so you want to You know, if it's stubborn, I can take a little bit of lithotine or mineral spirits and try and get the remaining off. Okay, so that looks good. This is different spatula than what we use over here. We have other ones that we use for the grease on the tin pan, but we really don't want to use this for grease on a tin pan, so I try to leave this one underneath a roller somewhere so that we don't confuse the two. Okay, so there's my roller. I'm all set with that. But now we need to talk a little bit about our ink, and there's a lot to know about inks, and you know, it can get pretty complicated pretty quickly, but for what we need right now is we need to kind of choose an ink that has a fair amount of grease content to do our second etch, and we need it to be the right consistency. So we want it to have a pretty good length and tack. So for what we're doing, we generally use 2 different inks. I brought a few out just to show you the difference. Sounds like it's starting to rain here. Okay, well, this one is called Graphic Litho Roll-Up Black, number 1921. This is a typical ink that people would use just for doing the roll-up. For doing, there's also another one called Greasy Roll-Up. It's very similar. It might even be the same. I'm not sure if they just changed the name. But Greasy Roll-Up, you know, it's really greasy, so they use it in the print process, you know, because we want to reestablish the grease layer in our stone to etch it. But I tend not to. Actually, the last time I used one of these, it almost seemed like it had too much grease content. And the style of mark making that I make, you know, I do a lot of reductive erasing and like scraping into my image. So I need a little bit less grease in my inks. I'm sure that this would be very good for some general uses, but generally I want to almost be a little bit less grease than normal. Let's see. I did have an image fill in quite a bit when I was using Greasy Roll-Up. It could have been because my etch was too weak, but you know, I just want to be cautious. Let's see. Need a couple spatulas here. I'll take 2 spatulas. It's a little dark in here, but I think everybody will be able to see. So I have one larger ink palette, and I have a smaller one. There's actually, we've got quite a few portable ones that we can use for this. But I have crayon black ink and 1796. So this is like Sennefelder 1796 is a real typical. These are the 2 like main types of ink that I prefer. Now we've switched over to a Hanco brand crayon black, and I've noticed that Hanco brand crayon black is a little bit less stiff and a little bit less tacky than the Graphic Chemical version of that. And I'm not sure. I think Graphic Chemical went through a stage where they weren't making it. It was unavailable, and so we kind of switched over to this one. But my ink ratio has changed a little bit. Now crayon black is kind of like the ink that I would. It's the most important ink in my opinion. It's very dense black, very nice pigment, and it is easy to modify. When I'm starting off with printing, I generally want to start off with a stiffer ink so that it's kind of harder, right? And so I'll use this as my base, and then I'll modify it with 1796. Now, if I didn't have any 1796, I could just use this number 3 varnish as well. We have a range of varnishes in the back. They come from like number 9 varnish all the way to a number 0 varnish and body gum. And generally, the lower the number, the stiffer the varnish is. So it'll stiffen your inks. The higher the number, it's gonna loosen your ink. So just a little bit of a background. Yeah, here's some more that greasy roll up. I've been having a really good amount of luck just printing with crayon black and number 3 varnish. I heard that some people were using it. I tried it out. I actually really liked it. So that's kind of what I've been doing mostly. But I haven't really done it with my second etch yet, but we'll see. I'll probably add a little bit anyway. Now, the crayon black, it's very stiff. When I open the can up, I want to remove it like this. I don't want to gouge the ink can, which is very common, especially in this, you know, this is a university, so students, you know, if you're not looking over their shoulder, a lot of times they will gouge the ink, and that's kind of the faux pas of the printmakers, right? We do not want to gouge the inks. So I'm going to take, this is a pretty flexible spatula knife, and you can see how I'm skimming the top. At least I hope you can see how I'm skimming the top. And I'm gonna go with that, and I'll probably, you know, I'm just gonna flatten this out, and I probably won't use anymore. I don't think I'm gonna be able to get to printing today, so I'll probably mix up my ink fresh tomorrow. So this is actually probably more ink than we need, and what I might do is just put a little bit away, because I know I'm going to be coming back tomorrow, and no, actually I'll leave it just for illustration purposes. Okay, put my lid back on, and so I have my crayon black, and you can see how stiff this is right now, and I just want to loosen this ink up. I want to keep it fairly contained. A lot of people will start mixing their ink, and you know, it gets all over the place. There's no need for it to take up the whole ink slab. So you can see it's very stiff right now. It's kind of a colder day, but if this was a hot day, you could imagine that the ink would be much looser already. And okay, so it's loosening up quite a bit, and I want to look for inconsistencies, but I'm not really seeing any. I'm going to go ahead and I'll use the same spatula and get out my 1796. Now the condition of this is slightly different. It's a looser ink. Now we got into this yesterday. There's a skin that forms on the top of the ink. I'm just going to kind of go underneath it, get some here, and I roughly want about like 50-50. 50% crayon black, 50% 1796. Now, if I'm printing this, I would want to go a little bit stiffer. So I would do less 1796, like generally 75% crayon black or 60%, and then modify after that. When you get better at it, you can kind of generally tell what's going to print well, and you can kind of just go for it. But when you're learning, you know, it's good to consider that you want a stiffer ink, and we'll talk about that a little bit in just a couple minutes. So you can see that this consistency is very loose compared to that. Now, while I have these both next to each other, let's do a little comparison, okay? So this is my crayon black ink. I want to make sure that you're being able to see this. This is my crayon black, and this is my 1796. Crayon black is very stiff. 1796 is relatively loose. We're going to look at the body of the ink first. Now, if I make a pile, you can see that this holds its shape. So that tells me that it has a lot of body to the ink. You can see it, even that little bit that's sticking up there, that's still there. I want to check that. And I also want to check the length of my ink. So when I check the length, I want to kind of make a pile like that, and then I want to just dab my palette knife in right about here. I don't want to do it on the top. I want to do it right about there and pull up. And you can see the little ridges here are very short. So that tells me this is a short ink. Do that again. And this is right out of the can, so that's very, you know, we knew that was gonna happen. This is my 1796 ink, and you can see, look at the body. It's starting to immediately, it doesn't hold its shape. It starts to pool out, and eventually this will just pool, like you'll see a pool of ink there. So that's got a very loose body, and if I do a pull, you can see how long that is, right? So I want to mix these together to get something where the length is, you know, not long, but also not so short. So I'm gonna slowly add in my 1796 to my crayon black. I want the majority of my ink to be the crayon black, and then I'll just add slowly as we go. And lately I have been enjoying using looser inks. They tend to give me a richer print faster while I'm printing. So I've been experimenting a little bit with that. So here I am. You can see how much easier this is to work the ink now. And you get kind of into a little bit of a groove here. And there we go. Now let's check the length. So again, there's the body. You can see it's pretty good. It kind of holds its shape a little bit, but it does pool out. And you can see the length. Get up close here. It's still, you know, it's not short, but it's not long. This is pretty good. Ideally, you know, these would stick up a little bit, but that is fine for what I want. Now, if I needed to, let's talk about the properties a little bit more in depth here. So, okay, when I'm printing, I want a stiff ink because my image could fill in, and meaning like the dark areas will want to get darker, but the light areas will also want to get lighter. When I'm printing, if I'm just using straight crayon black, it'll roll up very slowly, and then when I go to print, it's very tacky, so it's sticky. And my paper might even want to stick to the stone. It might peel up very slowly if I have really dense blacks. So, you know, if I need to make my ink less tacky, I can add magnesium carbonate. We have got shakers of this. Magnesium carbonate makes ink less tacky, and it increases the body, so it'll make that hold its shape a little bit more. It'll make my ink shorter, and you know, that might be useful in certain situations. Body gum does something very similar as well. It increases the tack and increases the body. So this increases tack, increases body. This increases body and reduces tack. So there's a little bit of, you know, you can see why we would use certain things at different times. And we'll be right back in just a minute. Okay, so this ink has a little bit, it is a little bit loose. I am gonna add just a little bit of, maybe the fan. I probably should have turned off the fan to do this, but I'm gonna add a little bit of magnesium carb, just a little bit into my ink, just to increase that body a little bit more. Sometimes you don't have to use this. Typically I don't use mag with black inks. Excuse me. Colored inks are very different than the black inks. The black inks are pretty much ready to use out of the can. You could, in theory, you know, that carbon or the crayon black is very, very dense though, so you wouldn't necessarily use that by itself, but it's easily modified with just number 3 varnish. The colored inks though, you do have to modify quite a bit. They're quite a bit different here, and each ink is slightly different. So I'm going to take a bead about that big, and you can see the flex of this scraper. I'm not going to pull it like this, I'm going to pull it like this. Okay, and maybe I got a little bit because I stopped. That didn't go out as smooth as I would have liked. Now, some people start with very little ink. I tend to go with a little bit more ink than most people generally would. I don't want to go right to the edge. You know, I just need it to be slightly wider than my roller. So I'll start with usually 3 stripes. Sometimes if I'm using a big roller, I might even do a 4th or an X, right? But I generally want to, every time I am adding ink to the slab, so this is the ink slab, I'm going to add 1 stripe across. And I've gotten a little bit intricate with the way that I ink my palette and count. I do my counting and everything. But I need to spread this out now. And the way I'm going to do that is with this leather roller. These handles are actually really nice. Now, if I leave one hand loose, it's usually my not my dominant hand. So I usually in my left hand, I leave it so that it's loose and free. In my right, I can grip it and then I can twist it when I grip, right? Or I can loosen it up very quickly. Something that people would probably want to do to practice is just keep one hand loose and practice rotating the roller with the other hand. Now I'm going to go up and back, lift and twist. Up and back, lift and twist. And I'm going side to side like 1, 2, 3, 4. So I'm not usually going 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2. I'm going 1, 2, 3, 4. And that's just because, you know, that's what we do on our stone as well. So I don't necessarily want to, you know, ink the whole thing. I just want to make sure that there's at least 1 revolution of the roller. Try and spread this ink out evenly. And you really get to learn to be in tune with your surroundings while you're doing this. Like the sound that the ink makes is a very telling feature. I'm gonna add another stripe here. Now, if I have too much ink, I'm not sure if you can hear this. It's a nice satiny kind of sound. I'm gonna do just my edge a little bit because it seems like it's kind of got some buildup of ink there. That sounds nice, right? Now, if I had too much ink on my slab, I'll hear more of a crackling sound. If I have a roller that doesn't have very good nap, I might hear more of like a thud sound when I'm rolling over my ink slab. So you can almost hear the sound of the roller clanking or like thudding against the glass palette. I want to look for any little impurities or something right there. If I get something on my sponge, I can take, or on my roller, I can take a wet sponge and sometimes just go like that. But this is something solid on my roller. So I'm gonna want to take, I guess I could use my spatula, just the edge of my spatula, and get that off. You would also want to remove any chunks, unwanted chunks that might be in your ink also. So go through while you're doing your working your ink and look for those, and maybe if you see a little thing, take the corner and just put it off to the side. So that's what we want to look for. Again, if I was printing right after, I would have much more ink on my side slab there. Okay, so now I am inked up. I think I see another. Yep, there it is. another little piece, and I can see it on my slab. Right there. Okay, I've seen some people put their roller down and just walk away. That's not a good thing to do, because it can and very well may just roll off the table and you could break this. These are very expensive, and they're all handmade, so you know, we want to take good care of them. Anytime I'm done with my roller, I'm going to put it away. Okay. So now we're going to replace our drawing material with fresh ink. So we've got our ink slab is ready, and I've got some lithotine, and I just want to do a little bit of prep work here. If you're ever doing this and you're not sure, you know, everybody's going to be unsure at first. I have a list of all the things that you need to do, very stripped down instructions, but once you've seen me do it, you know, this should make sense for you. Okay, I want to make 3 pads, 3 or 4 pads. So take 2 pieces of Bounty paper towel, or there's some other printmaking wipes that are specialty wipes that are meant for this. But any like really durable, like Bounty or Brawny is pretty durable. These shop towels are pretty good. You just want something that's durable, but also pretty soft, right? We don't want something that's really abrasive. And I'm doing everything in printmaking. When you're dealing with cheesecloth, tarlatans, or paper towels like this, you fold in all of your edges, fold in your edges again, and then you have a nice pad to buff with. And I just want 3 of those. You know, maybe have a 4th one. If you have a big stone, you know, you'll want to consider that as well. And then we need our asphaltum. Now, I used some asphaltum yesterday in class, and I noticed it was a little thick. It applied pretty thick on the stone. So I'm going to take a little mixing cup and wooden stick, and I'm gonna pour some out and just leave it in here. You can see that's pretty thick. I mean, asphaltum is thick, but that's maybe a little bit thicker than I want it to be. And so I'm gonna dilute it with a little lithotine. It was so thick that I wasn't able to get a very even coat. So lithotine, you'll see what we do with this in a minute, but when I remove that drawing material, I'm going to put down lithotine first and rub it up on my stone, and that's going to allow me to have a really stable base to apply my roller with the ink on it. Now that's pretty good. It's much more fluid. I feel better about it. I could probably go a little bit thinner if I wanted to. Maybe just a tiny bit more. There we go. That's good. So that's a pretty good consistency right there. Okay, and I'm just gonna put that to the side for now. Okay. Now, let's talk about what we're doing right now. Right now, this stone, I don't know how I got that on me. That's what happens when you're a printmaker, right? This stone right now has an adsorbed gum layer in the non-image areas from when we buffed down our gum etch. And it has oleomanganate of lime in the drawing material areas. Right now there's a gum layer and there's drawing material on my stone. So it's very stable. I can't really do too much to this to mess it up, you know. we're going to remove the drawing material with lithotripsine. And the drawing material is going to come up, but the gum layer is going to remain in those non-image areas. If I were to use water and sponge my stone, that would remove the gum layer. I have to always have at least one layer of protection on my stone. It either has to be rolled up in ink or drawing material and a gum layer, or just a gum layer. I can't take the gum layer off and remove the drawing material, because there's no way that I could be able to get my image back under those conditions. So if I remove the drawing material, make sure that there's a gum layer. If I remove the gum layer, make sure that there's a drawing layer. You never want to remove both of those things. And you know, it's a common mistake. It happens with students a lot. It happened to me when I was a student on my first image, you know, and I never got over it. So I would just want to make sure that everybody has a pretty good understanding of that. Okay, so now we're going to remove that drawing material. I wish I wasn't so covered in ink. I don't know what that was from. Interesting. Okay. So we need paper towels and lithotripsine. And I'm going to go ahead, make sure that I have a gum layer, because I buffed it down, you know, just a couple days ago. And take my Bounty paper towels, and I'm just gently going over the image with the lithotripsine. I don't want so much that it's just spilling over the edges, you know, I want to keep it kind of contained here. And gently go over it. Some of the drawing material might be reluctant to come up. It might be the tush wash typically is fairly, if it's very thick, then you'll have a little bit harder issue removing that tush wash. It doesn't necessarily mean that you should scrub it or anything like that. Just take your time, try and get up as much as you can, and then if there's some real stubborn areas, don't worry about it. A little bit more. So this is kind of the fun part of litho. It's the mysterious element of lithography. I always kind of liken it to, you know, I'm not a chemist and I don't really know any lithographers who are chemists. So we kind of think of ourselves a little bit more as like alchemists. We're doing this mysterious thing and with the stone, and it's a little bit magical, a little bit scientific, a little bit of magic, a little bit of superstition involved with this process. Okay, so that looks pretty good, and I'm just gonna, might do one tiny bit more. And I generally want my paper towel to be fairly clean, but now I'm done. Okay, I'm gonna bring my oily rags, put them in a red fire safe can, and now I need my asphaltum. If I'm taking it out of the can, I can apply it directly to one of these pads, but because I've already kind of worked on the pads, or worked on this, I'm gonna pour it directly on the stone. Oop, the fan almost caught it. And with a stone like this size, I want something about like that. Take my pad, and not super fast, but I want to spread this around pretty quickly, but I don't want this to be like squirting off of the sides. So big circles cover the entire image area of the stone, and I want to keep buffing this down similar to the way that I did with my gum Arabic. Set that aside, switch to a clean pad. and you got to move pretty quickly here. A larger stone might be more difficult, but nice even layer, and it's good. I didn't need the third one. If I had a larger stone, you know, it might be good to have even 5 different pads ready to go. If my application was too thin, I could have added another layer, so I could do that process again just to make sure that I have a thick enough layer. If it's too thick, you know, if the asphaltum is too thick and it kind of like it dries on you and you're not able to get a nice consistent flat layer of asphaltum, you might want to consider taking lithotripsine, removing that whole layer. That's what we did yesterday, and thinning out your asphaltum and trying it again. But this is basically what you want to see. Okay. So we removed the drawing material, we replaced it with asphaltum. That's going to be our base, our printing base. And now I'm going to remove my gum layer. Remember, I don't want to remove my gum layer and without that asphaltum. If I skip that asphaltum step, I lose my image, and I won't get it back. Flood the surface of the stone with cold water. Always cold water with stones. It'll keep my stone happier. We'll just say that. So flood the stone and gently move it around. I always have 2 bowls of cold water and 2 sponges. Usually I have one sponge that's more dirty than the other, and that is my litho, my dirty sponge. That's the one that I'm gonna use for this process. So you can see where the gum layer is starting to come up. So that dried gum layer on the surface is starting to come up. Flood that stone again. Not like tons and tons of water, but enough where it covers the surface comfortably. And I'm not scrubbing the stone. Some of this oftentimes is a little bit stubborn to come up, just like tush wash might be stubborn to come up with lithotripsine. But I just want to keep going, keep repeating, you know, take my time. Don't scrub too hard. Sometimes a little bit of a snappy gestural, snappy sponging helps lift off some of that. So I'm actually not applying much pressure. I'm just increasing how fast I'm doing this. And that pulls up some of that residual gum and asphaltum. So the asphaltum and the gum is coming up from the non-image areas. And it kind of reveals a little bit more of the image now. And if I can't get it all off, that's okay. I'm gonna go ahead and stop right now. Move my stone a little bit. Now there's no mineral spirits in this because, you know, I was careful not to get any down the sides, but I don't want to get mineral spirits in my sponge or my sponge water. But I'm gonna go ahead and switch to my clean sponge. Have that ready. And I'm gonna go over to my ink slab, charge my roller a couple times. And now I'm gonna roll up in ink. So this is the washout and roll up stage. We just washed out our image and replaced it with asphaltum. Now we're gonna roll it up in ink. Washout, roll up. Now, you can see the stone is drying, and that's because the fan is on over there. I'm actually gonna go turn that off before we continue. When I hold my roller, I wanna hold it straight up and down. I don't typically want to hold it like that. It's going to wear on my wrist and it'll put stress on the handles. So I want to hold my handle straight up and down and my sponge in the other hand, right? Now I'm wetting the stone because if it was dry and I started to ink up, the ink would go all over the place. But because adding a little bit of water to my stone, it's staying moist, and it will reject the ink. So I can tell that this is still wet here, but you can see the edges will tend to start to dry first. Especially if I had that fan on, you know, it's hitting the edges and it's gonna dry. And if I were to hit the roller with that, it'll accept ink really easily. And it'll do what's called a dry roll. We'll probably go over that a little bit more in printing. We'll go over rolling mechanics of it. This is a small stone, so it's not too hard to do. But generally, if I have a stone like this, I don't have to worry about my inking path as much. But generally, look, it's the width of the stone. I can do passes like this. Oops, I'm gonna put this down. I think I might ink it from this direction. I can ink it from here, I can ink it from here, from there, from there. The number of passes that I do depends on the size of the stone and the type of imagery I have. We'll go over some of that in the next video, but just kind of watch and pay attention to what I'm doing right now. You can see the stone is already drying. This is not actually a good state to have my stone left in, so I'm gonna go ahead and get this inked up. Sponging. I want my stone to be wet, but I don't want it to be too wet. Now let's take a closer look. It's actually pretty good. Okay. I want to show you what too wet looks like. If you can see that carefully, you can see the standing water on the stone is not a good thing. I want it wet, but I don't want it to have any standing water. Even that, I'm seeing some standing water. So usually in my stone, I just have a little bit in it, or in my sponge. There we go. No standing water, but it's still wet. Now I'm gonna ink from this direction. And you can see it came up, that asphaltum that was still on the stone did end up coming up. Look at my stone. That rolled up really quickly. I'll do 4 from this direction. And I'm doing the lift and spin. So this is actually rolling up very quickly in ink, and I want to pay attention that I don't over ink it, especially right now because I only did my first etch in this. And now I can see how that first etch was. And it looks like my etches were a little bit weak in this section, because you can see this is starting to ink up a little bit more than I wanted it to. So, you know, I probably could have used a stronger etch in those areas. It also could mean that it's inking up so quickly that my etches weren't strong enough in general. So I'm gonna have to be careful not to over ink this right now. But I wanna look in my darkest areas, my densest blacks, and I wanna look for the brown amber color of that asphaltum. And if I can still see some of that asphaltum, then I know I need to keep inking it up. I'm gonna do a couple more kind of fast, snappy rolls. And just do another inspection. I'm getting up close to it, and I'm really not seeing any of that asphaltum. And so I think I'm good to go here. Yeah, you can see some of these areas where I did a lot of heavy scraping. It's a little bit darker than I'd like it to be, so I'm gonna go a little bit heavier with my next etches. I'm not sure what I did for the other etches. I didn't write them down, but I'm guessing I probably did 5 or 6 a 10 and a 16. So we'll probably do about the same. Maybe, yeah, we'll just do the same. Look at all the ink that I have on my edges. I'm gonna want to clean that up before I do my second etch. Okay, so we're just at a little bit of a different point now. I just did a little bit of prep work just to make the video a little bit shorter. And so we just finished inking this up, and I'm ready to do my second etch. Now, if I wasn't happy with this image, and let's say I wanted to go back into it and add additional drawing to the piece, I would have to do a counter etch on this. Because the surface has been etched once and there's an adsorbed gum layer in the non-image areas, that's going to reject the drawing material. I mean, it'll show up on the stone, but when I go to etch it again, there's already adsorbed gum layer, so it's not going to accept new ink. It's not sensitive to ink anymore, or drawing material anymore. It's been desensitized. So I would need to resensitize this by doing a counter etch, and I could do that two ways. I could bring this over to the graining sink and flood it with hot water, like pretty substantially hot water for 10 minutes. Okay, that will remove the adsorbed gum layer and resensitize the stone. The other solution I can do is a solution of acetic acid and water. And I would just flood the stone with that and rub, sponge my stone. And I would do that a few different times, and the acetic acid will remove the adsorbed gum layer. Okay. If I want to make deletions, I could go ahead and do that right now. I don't have to resensitize the stone to make deletions. So I could go in with some sandpaper, X-Acto blades, you know, whatever it is that I had to make those deletions, and then it might be a little bit easier to do it then. I might actually do some, but I'm going to do it later because I'm in a little bit of a rush here. I saw a lot of ink along the borders here, so I've got some snake slip here. I'm just going to wet it and go around the edges. I could use sandpaper as well, but this is a little bit less abrasive. Keep wetting my stone. There's quite a bit on this. I want to remove that ink before I do my second etch. There's also an anti-tint solution that you could make. That is just phosphoric acid and gum arabic and water. So the ratio is about 10 drops of phosphoric acid, 1 ounce of gum arabic, and 5 ounces of water. And I would just take a pad and slowly go around like a piece of etching blanket. Works really well. Take a sample of the etching blanket that's maybe been tossed, or like an old blanket that we recycle, and do that. You'll see some of that when we do our printing. Okay, so I'm gonna probably take my dirty sponge to do this. Just go around the edges. Try not to go back into my image with my sponge because my stone is dry, and so it'll be faster to go in and etch. Got a little spot there still. Okay. Could also get a fan to help dry my stone. I'm going to want to move my rosin and talc. Okay, that's good enough. I'm gonna rosin. My ink is still wet, so I want to be pretty gentle with this. You know, this rosin will actually help to dry that ink as well. So I don't have to wait for it to dry or anything like that. I go right in with rosin. That'll help to dry the ink and stabilize the image. This is clinging to the greasy areas, just like it did in our first etch. Then take some powdered talc, so French talc. This goes into the non-image areas. So remember, the rosin will help protect the drawing material from the corrosive effects of the nitric acid. The talc will reduce surface tension on my image so that I can apply my etches evenly. I went ahead and mixed my etches already. So, you know, goggles, gloves, apron. I did 10 drops for my weakest, and I did 16 for my strongest. I just reduced it down to 2 etches because with my delicate areas, maybe I'll just add a little bit of, well, I guess this is clogged up. Nope, okay. Well, I've got this gum arabic. If we need it, I've got some straight gum arabic. I've got some other ones I could use too, but just for the sake of time. So I'm going to apply my weakest etch first. Go in these lighter passages. And you can see my image is pretty dark, and I'm gonna go in later with some acid tinting, so you know, I'm actually not quite done with the drawing elements in this piece. And I'm going through this pretty quick here. You know, I want to get this down. I actually have to go soon, so I want to make sure I have time. There we go. This was a little bit more delicate in here. You know, I'm just pooling that. So this whole step is basically the same as what we did with our first etch process. Switch to my stronger etch, and I'm going to be pretty liberal with this. I'm just going to put it on the whole thing in all of these remaining areas, and I'm just going to look for, even in some of these areas like that, I don't want that airplane wing to fill in on me, and it looks like it might want to. So I'm going in with a pretty hot etch over the entire image, even into places that I probably wouldn't have last time, because I want to reinforce that etch. I think my last etch was a little bit too weak, and so I'm just going in with an all-around etch that's a little bit hotter. Hopefully we can prevent any filling in from happening any more than it already has. And go in on those borders too. Use that hot etch wherever we did that scraping or honing with the snake slip. You know, the first time I saw quite a bit of frosting or flashing where the weak areas were, but I'm not really seeing too much of it. I'm pretty confident that that's still pretty strong now. So I'm just keeping it moving. Okay. Clean up my space a little bit. Take my dirty sponge. Maybe get up some of this excess water and gum. And I'm going to go ahead and just put the rest of this right on my stone. That's my hot etch, because I'm not seeing anything, you know, really crazy happen in terms of a chemical reaction. I'm not seeing those carbon dioxide bubbles too much. So I'm just going to let this sit for a little bit, and I'm going to buff, and then we'll be back. So I'm going to turn you off first. Okay, so I'm ready to buff down my gum layer. I removed some of that gum already and applied a little bit more even of that, the rest of that 10 drop etch. Okay, so I'm gonna probably move my stone in a little bit, get this area cleaned up just a little bit more. And I'm probably gonna leave, you can see that gum arabic is already really sticking. And if you're using a mat like this, you're gonna wanna make sure that you take your stone off of the mat, the placemat, and wipe the bottom of it and put it someplace where it won't glue itself to the background. Okay, I already wrapped up my roller, but I want to put away my inks. Now, if I wanted to save my ink for tomorrow, I would wrap it up in some, there is enough to save that, so why don't we save this ink. I'm just going to take some wax paper. You could use aluminum foil. And it'll last you for a couple of weeks like this. So I'm gonna mix in more next time. So I'm gonna mix in this remaining 1796, and I'm just gonna modify, because it is just black, I'm just gonna modify the ink as I need to. I'm gonna add more of the crayon black to this and stiffen it up. So just get it in a little folded pile and we're good. I'm gonna remove any excess, like big chunks of ink with my spatula or with my palette knife. Take a phone book and wipe it off. This is clean-ish. It's good for tomorrow. And then wipe down my spatula. Take a little mineral spirits. Mineral spirits are lithotrene. Little goes a long way here. Okay. And then I'm going to go around all of my ink slabs. You know, these are little portable cheap ones that I made Take the excess ink off with a razor blade. Now, if you don't want to use mineral spirits or lithotrene to do this, you could do your cleanup with vegetable oil. Be careful when you're doing this anytime you're using a blade. You can tell this blade's getting old because it's leaving a lot of residual. And again, I'm just going to clean this carefully. So I'm pulling away from the blade. I'm not going that way, I don't do that. And I'll probably get around to replacing these blades too. Okay, because this one doesn't want to go back in. So just be careful. Now I can take all of my old rags, a little bit of mineral spirits or lithotrene. You could substitute that with vegetable oil, like I said. Now, if I had time today, I would have printed this as well. And I would have used that same ink. I would have made sure that I had enough ink mixed up for my edition. I would have left the ink on the slab, and I would have been prepping my paper and prepping the press, but we're not doing that. We're going to do that separately. Hopefully we can do that soon. Kind of gather up all of my materials. I'm going to be coming back to this tomorrow. So I'm not going to put everything away because I'll just have to get it all out again. Take a page from the notebook. And then I'll take all my materials. I'll clean it up. I'm going to take my stone, move it, clean up the press bed, clean underneath the stone, and I will be ready to print tomorrow.